So hi, this is Lou, welcome to my channel, and in this week's video I've got something a little bit different. I'm in a different location today with my friend Cass, and she's very graciously allowed me to come and have a snoop around her studio, and I'm going to ask her a few questions about what she does. I really like on the channel to encourage everybody to be creative in whatever way they find interesting and to find their own passions. And Cass is really into bookbinding. Mm-hmm. So so I'm just going to find out all about it.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah. So Cass, why books? How did you discover them? Why did you get into them?
It's a good question. There's a long and rambling answer, but I'll try and keep it short.
Okay.
So I've always loved books since being a child, but I think in terms of making books and getting into bookbinding, it was really when I went to art school. So I studied fine art sculpture, and I found myself making really big sculptures and installations with light and lots of different materials. And I was forever filling in sketchbooks. So for me, to try and get ideas out of my head and into the world, I suppose the first step was getting that down on paper. And I would quite obsessively sketch the same thing until I saved enough money up or I found the right space to make the work itself. So I was going through sketchbooks like no tomorrow, and quickly realised that I couldn't afford to keep buying them. And I wanted some kind of what am I trying to think of? I wanted to decide what was in the sketchbook, so what paper I was drawing on, things like that. So I wanted to kind of curate them myself. So I just started making them really simple sketchbooks. And then as I kind of moved on through my degree, I started making books out of the same materials as my sculptures. Ooh. So things like wooden books and using concrete.
Concrete books.
Yeah, so they ended up being more like what you call artist books, I suppose. So because it kind of fitted with my work. And I think since leaving art school as well and not having the luxury of being able to put on exhibitions and make big work, I very much think of books as kind of sculptures in their own, like miniature sculptures almost. And I just love teaching. I love that I can share that passion with other people, especially people that say that they're not creative, which to me doesn't exist. Everybody is creative. They've just maybe not found what their creative thing is. And there's something really lovely with bookbinding about how you can involve lots of different artistic techniques like printing, and then you can kind of have to follow a set of rules and it becomes a book, and everyone that comes to my workshops will leave with a unique book that is kind of personal to them, and then it's almost then becomes a vehicle for another creative outlet, whether that's writing or drawing or sketching. And there's just something really nice about that process.
You've got quite a distinct ethos about your bookbinding, and it seems that kind of using recycled elements and things like that is really important to you. Yeah. Is that something that you kind of started out with, or is that something that's developed along the way?
That's a really good question, and I think it's good to point that out as well. Like there's lots of artwork and crafts, particularly. There's lots of different types of bookbinding. You get really fine binding. You get conservation binding, and I call what I do upcycled bookbinding, and for that very reason, because I really like to work with remnant materials and recycled materials, because it's just something I've always done. I always think back to where that came from, and I think it probably came from my gran, because my gran looked after me quite a lot when I was younger, and she was of the era where craft was just something that she did. It wasn't something she chose to do. She was constantly knitting. Whenever I'd go around to her house, we'd be making things with recycled cereal boxes and all sorts of things. So I think that's just ingrained in me. But environmentally as well, I think it's really important. We've got a lot of stuff in the world, and I quite like the creative challenge of working with stuff that already exists rather than, buying craft materials for the sake of it, if that makes sense. And when I first moved to Edinburgh about over 10 years ago now, I started volunteering with what was then the Remakery, so the Edinburgh Remakery. And my role there was very much whatever they got donated, whatever materials, it was my job to come up with some kind of workshop or activity that we could do with the public to learn skills. So it might have been fabric, sewing them into bags or things like that. But we got donated a big bit of leather once from an old sofa. It was a really big piece, and that kind of reignited bookbinding for me. I think I just saw it, and I just saw
you saw the books it could be.
I saw a library of books, and it just got me into it again, and I suppose got me into how to teach it, because I suppose that's another thing as well. There's making things for yourself, and then there's how you teach something, and that just really made me explore the potential of that and all the different ways that you can bind books, of which I've only scratched the surface. There's so many ways to bind books, and I think that's what I like about it, is that I can look at a piece of recycled material and think, how do I make that into a book, rather than going out with a list of what I need. I kind of prefer that creative challenge a bit.
So what gets you excited?
I think, well, I was mentioning to you before, so I've got an idea for an artist book in my head at the moment, and I don't often allow myself time to make my own work. I find myself quite busy doing workshops or making kits, so sometimes it's difficult to find time for my own creativity, which seems ridiculous because I'm always trying to encourage other people's. But I think what I find quite exciting is when I have an idea for something in my head and then I get to physically make it. And I've done so with this, just because it's really fresh in my head, with this book that I've got in mind, I had a little play around with making a kind of maquette of it. And even in the making process, it became something else, and like an accidental thing actually became something that now I'm going to focus on when I make the real thing. So I love, just the process of making, and I love seeing other people do that as well. Especially when I get people in the classes that say they're not creative or they've never made books before, and they may be a bit apprehensive, but then to see them leave with something that they're really proud of, that really fires me up. I love that, and I think I find the workshops as inspiring for me, because when everybody leaves, I'm totally G'd up and just want to make books. So I think I suppose I get excited about something coming into being, and I suppose putting something into the world that wasn't there before, and I suppose that's what art is really, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
There's something quite special about that.
Yeah, I think that's maybe where I differ a little bit. Not that I love putting stuff out in the world, but it's that when I start a project, I like to know what it's going to be at the end, and I like to kind of like know what all of the steps are going to be. I spend more time thinking about it than I actually do making it. So I do quite like when you get those kind of like accidental things, but it happens very rarely with me because I'm so controlled.
But I suppose that is the thing with bookbinding as well, and I find that in my workshops is, you do have to follow a set of rules. So it's creative, but it also, there's some limitations on it, which is why I quite like working with other artists or using other techniques that are a bit more freeing and creative. So that could be printmaking or stamping onto fabric or doing something that could be anything, and then having to put it into a book form is quite nice. There's something quite nice about those two contradicting things.
Can we have a look around your studio? Do you want to tell us where we are? And we're in like it's like a converted.
It's a shipping container.
It's a shipping container. Yes.
So I'm in a space called Meanwhile in Leith. So in Leith in Edinburgh, and it's run by artist studios called Out of the Blue. So they have different community art spaces all across Edinburgh, and this is it's a gap site basically. So it's going to be built on eventually, but in the meantime, there's 6 converted shipping containers. So they just look like a big box from the outside, but on the inside they've done a really good job wooden cladding them, and I've got a little heater which is really nice.
They're really nice. They're really...
And they've got a nice window which is really good for the light. So these different artists use these spaces, and it's been really nice for me to have a place to put this is the first studio I've ever had, so just to have a place to be and surround myself with all the things that inspire me. And it's been nice to teach in here as well occasionally. So that's where we are. Good. But yes, let's have a look.
So Cass, have you got like favourite tools that you use?
Yes, they're hidden away though. Tools wise, I think, so I'm quite conscious, we've talked about this a bit before, about things being environmental or locally sourced if they can be. So this is my bamboo bone folder, which is used to fold paper and get a really nice crisp edge. And this is my awl, which I use for punching holes. So this is made by a great company in Sheffield. And one of my saviours, especially when preparing for workshops or making kits, is my Rotary Cutter. So don't look too closely because this is a bit battered. And if you're...
The best tools are.
I know. But I think you often use this for quilting and for cutting fabric. But if you've got anyone watching that uses textiles, they'll be horrified because this has been well used to cut leather. So I find that this really helps speed up the process and get a really nice sharp cut. So that's a few of my favourite tools. So this is my pin cushion that one of my students made me. So I take this to workshops, but I'm forever, needles are just the easiest things to lose. So usually that is full of needles, but it's just, I just love it. It just makes me smile.
So have you got some of the books that you've made here?
I do, yes. They're a bit off-piste.
Oh, good.
It's
I
not
like
your
that.
usual.
I like that.
So I've tried in my studio, it's quite nice because I can kind of have space to display things a little bit. So this book is a book I made a couple of years ago now. So I'm really quite passionate about outdoor swimming. So I like to swim in the sea a lot. And I went down south down to Cornwall and did a kind of swimming retreat, but it was swimming, wild swimming and kind of environmental art. So it was amazing. I just read it and had to go. But I basically got to play around with materials and found these on one of the long sea swims that we did. So these are just some pebbles from the beach. I found some fishing line just washed up on the shore. And then I took some photocopies onto acetate of just different things that I found in the water. And then took a cyanotype print of my hands in the water. And so this is just a very personal thing, but for me, when I kind of pick this up and hold this, it kind of completely takes me back to that swim and to that moment, which is really lovely. And I think that's what's quite nice about the books that you make yourself. And there's just something quite nice about holding it in my hand and the tactility of it as well. So yeah, that's one of my favourites, which is totally just for me. But so that goes pride of place up there. But I've got other more obscure books as well in here. So this is a book that I made. I was doing a residency with Granton Castle Walled Garden. So it's a medieval garden that has been kind of rediscovered by local volunteers, and they've trying to transform it back to a workable garden. So this is a heritage pea pod from the garden. So I organised an exhibition at the garden and invited people to make books inspired by the space. So we had a little library at the garden that people could look at. So this is literally as obscure as you can get. So this is a pea pod stitched together. And then inside it I made a kind of set of little books. And these have the fingerprints of all volunteers that work at the garden.
Oh, wow.
So it's not finished yet. I still need to go back and collect more fingerprints. But I kind of managed to get the peas from the pods, and I made a little book up at the top as well. So that kind of holds all the beans together, I suppose. And I just quite like this idea that they could be planted, and it kind of continues that history and that tradition of gardening in that space. And there's a little bizarre kind of concertina book that does fold up, and it says, "The gardener's year is a circle, as is their labour never an end." So I think I quickly learnt when I was doing that residency that you just finish one part of the garden and then everything had grown. It just never ended, which is quite nice in a way. But so that was my kind of piece for that project.
Wow, beautiful. You've got lots of stashes of kind of recycled materials and stuff in here. Yes, it's a bit of a treasure trove.
yeah. If you dig deeper, it is. If you look behind there, it is. I get materials from all over the place. So I kind of use, like I say, remnant leather quite a lot. So this is some of the leather that I get from a tannery called Hewitt & Sons. So they're a tannery and a bookbinding suppliers in Livingston, but they have a big stash of leather that's tarnished in some way that they can't use because they can't sell it as kind of high-end leather. So this is stuff that, some of this is literally sat in this pile for like 20 odd years. And for me, like, this has been cut out of, but you can see it has little bits, like little nicks out of it like this, or the colouring might be uneven on the other side, which means that they can't use it. So I really like these as well. I really like the lettering that you get on things like this. And when I'm making a book out of this, I kind of purposefully choose to work with these marks and these imperfections. So yeah, this is some of the leather stash. But I also work with faux leather as well. I think I'm getting a lot more people that are vegan and that would prefer not to use leather. So I'm kind of looking into different materials that I can use for that as well. Yeah, so I'm forever collecting bits and bobs. But this could equally be, I've got kind of old leather belts, old jackets, things like that I gather over time. And I think when people know you gather stuff like that, they give you stuff as well. So I'm never without materials, which is great.
So you teach lots of workshops, but you're not teaching people to bind pebbles together.
Not yet.
That's coming.
That's coming soon. I teach. Well, like I said, there's so many different types of binding, and some lend themselves better to some materials than others. So one of the really popular kind of workshops are these kind of exposed long stitch bindings, you call them, but these can come in lots of different shapes and forms. So this one here as well, this is an exposed binding with two different bindings on it. So there's a straight stitch on this side and a cross stitch. So this is a back-to-back book. Yeah, so these are exposed leather stitch bindings, and then you get other materials. Let me think. So this is an envelope book, so I really like this one. So this has got an exposed spine, so you can see there's not a leather solid spine. You actually see the edges of the pages, or what you'd call signatures. Mm-hmm. But in this case, this one's made up of envelopes, so that you can store things in here. So the whole point with this was that it'd be somewhere that you could kind of store cards or letters and memories. So I suppose more of a memory album. So that's weird.
You could really make it really personal, couldn't you?
Yeah, completely. I've got a workshop coming up actually that's very much about what you'd put in it as well. So it's about letter writing as much as it is about the physicality of it. So this is Japanese stab binding. So this is a way to bind single sheets of paper together. So you're not folding them over and creating booklets or signatures, you're literally stabbing them together. And this is where you can start. This is handmade paper that I made at Pulp Studios in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. But you can incorporate lots of different papers into them. And they're just quite fun, quick books to make, but quite effective. And I think the nice thing about books as well is they make really good presents. So I'll often have people that come to workshops and they'll usually say that they're making it as a gift, and then they end up keeping it for themselves because you can't bear to part with your first book. But then they can be really nice to personalise. So these could be, recipe books, they could be gardening journals, they could be diaries. You can really think about the person when you're making them and, make it personal to them, which is quite lovely.
Cass and I have been working together because we are putting together an online workshop. We both are artists with an artist collective called Arianas, and we run workshops there. And because of the pandemic and everything, we're moving more to doing online workshops. So we're putting together an online workshop that involves both printmaking and bookbinding. Yeah. So it's going to be really good fun.
Yeah,
and
I'm really excited about it. Yeah. It's really, I think as well, because especially as an artist working on your own, it's really lovely, like bouncing off someone else. And I really enjoyed doing it. So I can't wait to see how people engage with it. It'd be great.
Yeah, so it's going to be like there'll be some video content, which is going to be like the tutorials, like how to do it, how to make the books, and how to do the printmaking part of it. there's going to be a kit which we'll mail out to people in the UK. If you're not in the UK and you still want to be part of it, you can register for a version without the kit. And there's also an online Zoom session that we're going to be doing where we'll do like Q&A, and people can show us their work if they want to.
No, I think that's quite important. I think that's often that is my favourite part of the workshop, is at the end when you can but share each other's work and share inspiration. So that's a way for us to try and emulate that online, which has worked quite well in the past. So I think that would be a really nice way to bring it together.
Yeah. So I'll be putting details in the description of how you can sign up for that workshop if that's something that you're interested in. And I'm sure this won't be the last you'll see of Cass on the channel.
Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for letting me come round.
No problem.
So thanks very much for watching today. I really hope that you've enjoyed this. If you'd like to see more of this kind of content where I interview and involve other artists and creatives, then please do let me know, because it's something I'm quite keen to do some more of. So I'm always producing new videos, one every week, fingers crossed. And all on different art making, creative, sewing topics like that. So I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.